I stopped working construction full-time at 63, but I never stopped fixing things. 40 years of pipe fitting teaches you that. Every problem has a source, and if you trace it far enough, you always find it. I just never expected the biggest leak in my life would be inside my own son's house. After my hip replacement left me needing help for a few months, I moved in with my son and his wife to recover. I thought family meant showing up for each other. But by the second week, my daughter-in-law handed me a mop and said, "If you're going to eat our food, you can at least clean up after yourself." I said nothing. I kept quiet through the pain, through the humiliation, until the night I overheard her on the phone talking about my pension, and I finally understood why they really wanted me there. Thank you for being here with me. Before we go any further, tell me, son or daughter, where are you tuning in from tonight? I always like knowing who's sitting with me while I tell these stories. Welcome back to the channel. A quick note before we start, this story blends real experience with fictional details for the sake of the telling. Names and towns have been changed, but the truth in it is real, and I think you'll feel it. There's a particular kind of gray that settles over Pittsburgh in late October, when the sky sits low over the rivers and the wind off the Monongahela cuts straight through a canvas jacket. I'd lived in that gray my whole life and never minded it. It was honest weather. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. I was 66 years old, standing in a parking lot outside Allegheny General with a cane in one hand and a discharge folder in the other, waiting for my son to pick me up after hip replacement surgery. My name is Raymond Kessler. I spent 41 years running pipe for the same union local, retired at 63 with a decent pension and a house on Larchwood Avenue that my wife Dorothy and I bought the year Nixon resigned. Dorothy passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Diagnosed too late to do much of anything but say goodbye slowly instead of quickly. I still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand. I don't know why. I just haven't been able to move them. The surgery itself went fine. Dr. Ahmed, a careful young woman with a steady voice, told me the hip replacement was clean, no complications, but recovery would take real time. 6 weeks minimum before I could trust the leg on stairs, longer before I'd be driving again. She asked the question they always ask. Do you have someone who can help you at home? Someone to check on you, get groceries, make sure you're not overdoing it. That was the question that mattered. I lived alone in the Larchwood house since Dorothy died, and my knees weren't what they used to be even before the hip went. My son Danny Daniel, though I've called him Danny since the day he was born, lived 20 minutes away with his wife Vanessa in a rental house over in Bethel Park. Good school district, Vanessa always said, though they didn't have kids yet. Married 4 years. Danny worked in insurance claims, steady job, decent money. Vanessa did something with social media marketing I never fully understood, worked from home, always on her phone, even at dinner. When Danny picked me up from the hospital that afternoon, he seemed happy enough to see me. Helped me into the truck, asked about the pain levels, drove careful over the potholes on Route 51. "You're staying with us, Dad," he said, like it was already decided. No arguing. Vanessa already set up the guest room. I should have asked more questions right then. I should have noticed how quickly the offer came, how rehearsed it sounded coming out of his mouth. But I was tired, and I was in pain. And some part of me, the part that still remembered him small, still remembered teaching him to check the pressure on a boiler line, wanted to believe my son wanted me there, simply because he loved me. The guest room turned out to be the converted half of their garage. Vanessa had put in a space heater and a daybed and called it finished. It wasn't heated through the main system, and Pittsburgh in November doesn't forgive a room like that. The first night, I lay under 2 blankets with my new hip aching and told myself it was temporary, that I'd only be there a few weeks, that I could tolerate cold for the sake of not being alone in an empty house on Larchwood. Vanessa had opinions about my presence from the first morning. She wasn't cruel exactly, not at first. She was efficient, the way you're efficient with something you've decided is a task rather than a person. She made a chore chart and taped it to the refrigerator. My name was on it. Fold laundry, wipe counters, water plants. I was 6 days out from hip surgery, moving with a walker, and there was a chore chart with my name on it taped at eye level so I'd see it every time I came into the kitchen. "It's not a lot to ask," she told me the first time I mentioned the pain of standing at the counter. "You're not paying rent, Raymond. Everybody contributes something. I want to be fair here, because I've thought about this a great deal since, turning it over the way you turn over a bad weld looking for the crack. I understood, in a way, why she felt that. I was an extra body in a house that wasn't mine, eating their groceries, using their hot water, taking up a room they might have used for something else. I understood the resentment even if I didn't think it was earned. What I didn't understand, not for weeks, was how deep it went, or where it was pointed. Danny worked long hours, often didn't get home until 7 or 8, which meant most of my days were just me and Vanessa in that house, and most of what passed between us was her voice telling me what I hadn't done well enough. The dishes weren't rinsed right. I'd left a light on. I was using too many paper towels. Small things, each one small enough that complaining about it would have made me sound petty, but they piled up the way water damage piles up behind a wall, silent, until one day the whole thing gives. 3 weeks in, she stopped cooking separate meals for me. She'd make dinner for herself and Danny, real dinner, a protein and vegetables, something with care in it, and leave a can of soup or a frozen dinner on the counter with my name written on a sticky note. I was still on blood thinners from the surgery, still supposed to be eating things that wouldn't upset my stomach, and a can of chili with too much sodium wasn't that. I mentioned it once. She said, "I'm not running a restaurant, Raymond. If you don't like what's here, you're welcome to cook for yourself." I was standing with a walker. My son knew this. My son came home at 8, ate the good dinner his wife had made him, and never once asked why my plate looked different from his. That's the piece that still catches in my throat when I think about it. Not Vanessa. Vanessa was who she was, and I'd stopped expecting warmth from her by the second week. It was Danny. Danny sitting 15 feet away at that dinner table every single night, close enough to see exactly what was happening, and choosing, every single night, to look at his phone instead. The turn, the real turn, the one that changed everything, happened on a Tuesday night in early December. I couldn't sleep. The garage room was cold even with the space heater running, and my hip was aching in that deep, specific way that made lying still impossible. I got up around 11 to make myself a cup of tea, moving slow with the walker down the hallway past their bedroom door, which was cracked open maybe 6 inches. I heard Vanessa's voice, low, the particular low of someone who thinks they can't be heard. He gets almost $4,000 a month between the pension and Social Security, Danny. 4,000. And he's paying nothing here. Nothing. If we can get him to sign the house over now instead of waiting for probate, we save ourselves a fortune in legal fees later, and we start renting Larchwood out immediately. That's another 2,000 a month, easy, in this market. I stood very still in that hallway. The walker didn't creak, thank God. Or maybe I just don't remember if it did, because everything in me had gone quiet and cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of that garage. Danny's voice, quieter, harder to hear, something like, "I don't know, Ness, he just had surgery. Can we not do this right now?" There's never going to be a right time, Danny. He's here. He's vulnerable. He's grateful. Or he should be. This is the moment. You said yourself, he mentioned, wanting to update his will. We just guide that conversation. That's all. We guide it. I did not go in that room. I did not confront them that night. I want to explain why. Because I know some of you watching would have kicked that door open right then, and maybe you'd have been right too. But 41 years of pipe fitting teaches you something else too. You don't cut into a line under pressure. You shut the valve first. You understand the whole system before you touch anything, or you flood the basement. I went back to that cold garage room, and I lay awake until 4 in the morning, and I made a decision. I was going to understand exactly what my son and his wife intended to do to me, and then I was going to make sure they couldn't do it. The next morning, I called my nephew Gary. Gary's my sister's boy, 44 years old, an estate attorney out in Cranberry Township, the kind of guy who golfs with judges and knows exactly how these things work. I hadn't spoken to Gary in almost a year, not since Dorothy's memorial, but family is family, and blood that isn't trying to take your house is worth calling. "Uncle Ray," he said. "What's going on?" I told him everything. The chore chart, the separate meals, the overheard conversation. Gary went quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then he said the sentence that changed the shape of everything that followed. "Uncle Ray, I want you to listen to me carefully. Don't sign anything. Don't discuss your will with them at all, not even casually. And I want you to start writing things down, dates, what was said, what happened, everything. Today. End." I bought a spiral notebook at the Rite Aid 2 days later, the kind with the plain black cover, 99 cents, and I started writing. Every meal I was given, and what it consisted of. Every chore assigned while I was still using a walker. Every night Danny came home and said nothing. I wrote down the date of the hallway conversation, as close to word for word as I could remember it, and I underlined the number 4,000 twice. I also did something Gary suggested that I hadn't thought of myself. I called my bank and had them flag my accounts, add a verbal password requirement for any changes, anything at all. I called my insurance agent and confirmed the deed to Larchwood was solely in my name, which it was Dorothy and I had refinanced years back and I'd never added anyone else to it. And quietly, without telling Danny, I made an appointment with Gary to update my will the way I actually wanted it, not the way anyone was hoping to guide me toward. The weeks that followed were strange in a way I don't know how to fully describe. I kept living in that cold garage room. I kept eating the sad, frozen dinners. I kept filling out Vanessa's chore chart, badly, because my hip still wasn't right, and I let her think I hadn't noticed anything. There's a particular discipline to that smiling at someone while you understand exactly what they're trying to take from you. I don't recommend it as a way to live. But I understood, finally, why my father used to say that the quietest man in the room is usually the one who sees the most. Christmas Eve, I finally went home to check on the Larchwood house Danny drove me over. Said he wanted to make sure the pipes hadn't frozen while I'd been gone 2 months. I stood in my own kitchen for the first time since September, looked at Dorothy's reading glasses still sitting on the nightstand through the bedroom doorway, and something in me settled. I called Gary that night from my own living room. "I'm ready," I told him. "Draw it up exactly the way we discussed." Christmas morning, I sat all three of us down at the kitchen table in Bethel Park before either of them had finished their coffee. I set the black spiral notebook on the table between us. Vanessa looked at it the way you look at something that might be a spider. "I want to say some things," I told them, "and I'd like you both to let me finish." I opened the notebook and I read. I read the dates. I read what was served for dinner, and on which nights, and what Danny had eaten 15 feet away. I read the exact words I'd heard through that cracked door in December. 4,000 a month. Save ourselves a fortune. He's vulnerable. We guide it. And I watched Vanessa's face go the color of the sky over the Monongahela in October. "That's not you were listening to a private conversation," she said, her voice climbing. "I was standing in a hallway in your house at 11 at night because the room you gave me was too cold to sleep in," I said. "I wasn't hiding anywhere. You were the ones being careless with your voices." "This is insane, Raymond. You're twisting things. We took you in. We gave you a place to recover. You gave me a garage with a space heater and a chore chart," I said, and my voice did not rise, because I had practiced this in my head every night for 6 weeks and I was not going to hand her the satisfaction of watching me lose control. "You fed your husband dinner and fed me sodium out of a can while I was on blood thinners after major surgery. And you spent your nights figuring out how fast you could get my house signed over before I even understood what recovery from anesthesia does to a man's judgment." Danny hadn't said a word. He was staring at the table, and his jaw was working the way it used to when he was 9 years old and about to cry and trying with everything in him not to. "Dad," he finally said. "I didn't. I told her I didn't want to push you on the will stuff. I told her." "You told her you didn't want to push me," I said. "You didn't tell her no. And you sat at that table every night, Danny, close enough to see exactly how your wife was treating your father, and you looked at your phone instead of looking at me. That's the part I need you to hear. Not the money. I don't care about the money, son. I have plenty, and none of it was ever going anywhere but to you eventually. If you'd simply been decent to me, and let time do what time does. What I can't forgive as easily is that you watched it happen, and you said nothing, for 2 months, every single night." Danny's face came apart the way a face does when a person finally lets something through that they've been holding back with both hands. He made a sound that wasn't a word, just breath and grief together. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, I don't." "I know," I said, and I meant it, because some part of me still believed there was a decent man under whatever Vanessa had built around him these past 4 years, under whatever he'd let himself become in that house. I believed it, and believing it hurt worse than the anger had. Vanessa stood up fast enough that her chair scraped the floor. "This is completely unhinged," she said, her voice gone bright and sharp, the sound of someone performing outrage because outrage was the only tool she had left in her hand. "You're a sick old man who we took in out of the goodness of our hearts, and now you're sitting here with a notebook like you're building some kind of case against us." "I called my bank 3 weeks ago," I said, and that stopped her the way a hand stops a swinging door. "Every account is locked with a verbal password only I know. My will was updated a week ago by my nephew, who happens to be an estate attorney, and it protects the Larchwood house in a trust that neither of you can touch. Not now, not after I'm gone, not through any conversation you guide anybody toward. I think we both know you're not in a position to call anything I've done unhinged. She pressed her lips into a thin white line and said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. I looked at Danny one more time. He had his forearms braced on his knees, staring at the floor, shoulders shaking with that slow, suppressed shudder of a man losing a fight he knows he's already lost. Some part of me wanted to cross that kitchen and put my hand on the back of his neck, the way I used to when he was a boy and a bad grade or a broken friendship had knocked the wind out of him. I didn't do it. Some lessons only take root if you carry them without anyone softening the ground underneath you. I'm going home today, I said. Back to Larchwood. My hips healed enough to manage the stairs, and frankly, I'd rather be cold in my own house than warm in someone else's who doesn't want me there. I closed the notebook. Danny, you know where I live. The door's never been locked to you, not once in your life, and it isn't locked now. I hope one day you find your way back to being the man I raised. I mean that. I packed the little I'd brought some flannel shirts, my shaving kit, the framed photo of Dorothy I'd carried into that garage room the first night, because I couldn't sleep without her watching over me even from a picture frame. Danny offered to drive me. I told him I'd already called a cab. I think we both understood why. The cab ride to Larchwood Avenue took 18 minutes on empty Christmas morning streets, past the shuttered hardware store and the Presbyterian church with its lights still on from the midnight service, past the Little League field where I'd taught Danny to throw a curveball the summer he turned 11. Snow had started falling somewhere around the Liberty Tunnel, fine and quiet, the kind that doesn't stick so much as settle. I got out at my own address and stood at the end of the front walk for a minute before I went in. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the way houses always do when you've been gone a while. The porch light Dorothy always insisted on leaving on for me, even when I was only running to the hardware store for 20 minutes, still burning in the gray morning. I walked up and touched the cold brick beside the front door, the way I used to touch her shoulder walking past her in the kitchen, an old habit that had outlived the person it was for. I let myself in. The house was cold. Furnace turned low while I'd been gone, but it was a clean cold, an honest cold, nothing like the garage. I set my bag down in the front hall and carried Dorothy's photograph into the bedroom and set it back on the nightstand next to her reading glasses, where it belonged, where I should never have taken it from in the first place. That night I sat at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me and thought about everything I might have done differently. I should have asked harder questions back in October, before I ever agreed to move into that garage. I should have trusted the small, cold feeling in my gut the first time Danny said no, arguing, a little too fast, like a man reciting a line he'd been given rather than a son making an offer from his own heart. I should have remembered what Dorothy used to tell me, back when we were young and broke and living paycheck to paycheck in a one-bedroom apartment off Butler Street. Love doesn't ask you to disappear to make room for someone else's comfort. If you're watching this tonight and you have a parent getting older, a father or a mother who's had a hard year, who's quietly making themselves smaller so they don't feel like a burden in your house, please, go and look at them. Really look. Not at what they have, not at the house, the pension, the number in the bank account. Look at the person. That is what these stories are actually about. Underneath everything. Not revenge. A person who simply needed to be seen by the people who were supposed to love him the most, before it was almost too late for either of them to fix it. Real justice in a family doesn't come from a courtroom, and it doesn't come from getting the last word at a kitchen table either, though I won't pretend that morning didn't feel like something settling into place after weeks of feeling unsettled. It comes from the moment you stop apologizing simply for existing in your own life, and you start living in it again, on your own terms, in your own house, with your own name on the deed and your own coffee going cold at your own table. I don't know if Danny will find his way back from whatever he let himself become in that house in Bethel Park. I hope to God he does, because the porch light on Larchwood Avenue is still burning, and it always will be, for as long as I'm the one who gets to decide who it's burning for. That's the difference between a father and whatever a person becomes when they stop paying attention. I still choose to leave that door unlocked. Even now. My only advice to anyone listening tonight, don't wait until somebody hands you a chore chart in the middle of your recovery to understand exactly what you're worth to the people around you. You do not have to earn a place in your own story. Every father who's ever had to learn this the hard way finds that out eventually. I only wish I'd found it a little sooner than I did. If this story stirred something in you tonight, leave a comment and tell me what you felt. And tell me where you're watching from. I read every one. Share it with a son or daughter who needs to hear it, or with a father who needs to know somebody out there understands exactly what he's carrying. And if you believe, the way I do, that family justice matters, that it's worth telling these stories even when they're hard to tell, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for sitting with me through this whole thing tonight. It means more to me than you probably know. And one last note before you go. Some of what you hear on this channel is fictionalized, built to carry a true feeling even when the details themselves are invented. If that's not the kind of thing you're looking for, no hard feelings at all. Go find what serves you. But if you're still here with me, I'll see you in the next one.